Conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, USDA, Farm Production and Conservation Division. Well, they just changed their name, so I have to remember my acronyms. And with me I have Ryan St. Laurent. He is a technician with the Conservation District. And Jennifer Carlson, who is a planner, conservation planner for the Conservation District. Ryan and Jennifer are kind of new to Envirothon, so I'm going to be doing most of the talking here, and they're my key support staff here. Feel free to interrupt with questions. It's not interrupting. Feel free to ask questions and have me clarify. I am piling on a lot of information today. You're essentially, when you go through soils in Envirothon, you're getting a college course, half a college course in basic soil science. I spent a good half of my career as a soil scientist mapping soils in southern Maryland. So I know a little bit about soils in southern Maryland. So why do we care about soils? If those of you who have been with us before may have seen this demonstration, if you go on into natural resources, I recommend you use demonstrations like this. It works well for any age. If you're interacting with people and you're trying to explain to them the importance of some of our limited resources. And there's a demonstration similar to this one. I'm going to be illustrating soils, but you can do it with water. There's one out there online that you could do with water. And I almost transferred to that one this year because water resources and water use on a local sense is what the 5th issue is this year. I'm going to spend a good bit of time today tying soils and water together. Another thing we have today, you guys can go home with one of these per team. It's a poster on the water cycle that NRC has put together. We have a lot more copies, so if you need more copies, just contact the district office. So this apple is representing the earth. How much of the earth is covered by water? Anybody know?
73%.
73%. I'm not going to be that precise, sorry. So 75% is a handy 3/4. So there's half my apple. This will be my lunch. So 3/4. Ooh. That doesn't leave us much dry land, does it? Of this dry land, about 40% is polar regions, polar region at the South Pole, deserts, ice caps, stuff like Greenland. So, again, I can't quite approximate 40% real well here. I'm going to cut this roughly in half. Okay, we've got a very small sliver of the entire Earth. Of this, more than half of it is limited by things like climate, too cold, salinity, too salty, or other chemical limitations for agricultural production. So, also too dry for dry land agriculture. I've taken away a half of that. The remaining less than 10% of the earth is available to the entire population of the world to produce food. And there's a lot of competition for this land with things like development, recreation, all those things that we depend on. The entire population of the world is dependent on this much arable soil compared to the entire world. This is why, to me, soils are a critical and understood resource. that's my spiel for why soils matter. So let's dive into soils. We're going to go start here with going through that scorecard that you have in front of you. You have a big sheet of paper that looks similar to the parts of the Envirothon scorecard. The process that we go through in looking at a soil is the same process that soil scientists go through as we develop the soil surveys. We look at the soil and the landscape in which that soil formed, and we describe that in detail, and then we begin to look at what that information that we have described about that soil tells us about its benefits and its limitations, or its suitabilities and its limitations for use, for whatever use we're putting it to, be that agriculture, development, recreation, military uses, all kinds of things. We can look at that soil, and from long years of experience, people know how the various types of soil are going to behave under the uses we plan to put them to. So the soil survey is a tool that we can use to evaluate land anywhere that a soil survey is. Most of the nation is covered by soil maps or soil surveys. We can use it in the planning process of using that land. It can be using that land as a homeowner, a farmer, a aquaculture farmer, a developer, a planner. The soil survey is used for the planning on or off site. It's a step away from actually looking at the soil on the spot you're about to use. The Envirothon leads you through the process of evaluating that actual soil, where you find it in the field, that soil and that landscape, and then deciding whether it is suitable for the use that we make up or decide that we're going to evaluate it for. So it's a multi-step process. Any science is about learning the language of describing that thing. In our case, it's soils, learning the language of soils. We use a lot of the words that we use every day, but we use them specifically. The word clay has very specific meanings in soil science. The word texture, we're very familiar with these words, but they have a very specific meaning in our science. So just like any science, it's about describing the system we're working with. Biology, the biology of any particular organism. So what we're looking at here is a map of King's Landing. This was the approximate location of the other pits. We got two soil profiles the other day, one from behind the building and one from, well, I won't spoil the surprise. We'll try and figure out where it came from. So let's move on to the next slide. So here's a soil survey map taken off of the Web Soil Survey of King's Landing Park. So you see these funny shaped blobs outlined in orange. Those blobs represent a soil mapping unit. Each soil mapping unit has a description in Web Soil Survey format and move through. But let's see, you have the handouts there. The second page, the one that's not the map, has each of the map unit names. Let's go briefly through a map unit name. What do you see there? You see funny names like Doden. And then it might say, let's see, I need to cheat here. Thank you very much. So DOG stands for Doden, or Downer Doden Complex, 25 to 80% slopes. So each of these map unit symbols has a meaning. The first letter usually has to do with the first letter of the first named soil type in that mapping unit. The third letter is the slope phase. The slope phases in the coastal plain of Maryland, A is the shallowest, it's 0 to 2%, B 2 to 5, C 5 to 10, D 10 to 15, or 5 to 15 if we skipped over C and lumped them together. E 15 to 25% slopes, so we're getting steeper and steeper and steeper. F 25 to 40, and G 40 to 80. So just by looking at those map unit symbols now, you can tell something about the lay of the land, how the slopes are on that land that you're looking at on the map. So if we got our soil profile, the first one we're going to look at, let's see, we'll come in here, this is the road coming in. Here's the building, and we were back, there's the building. Thank you, Ryan. So, I saw that. You want to hit it again?
Right where we're at.
Yeah. So, we are here, but our profile came from, right in here. So we were in a fairly steeply sloping area, and we actually were right on the line between IWB and DOG, I think, or DWE. Okay, so we pulled those soils out, but this is a map that you would use at the general planning phase. So let's move on to the next slide. So we would want to make a prediction such as, is this land suitable for farming? Well, just right off. I told you it came from a borderline between DOG and a less steep slope. Suitable for farming? Any answers? I can see some heads shaking. No. Yeah, you would open it up to high risks of erosion and soil degradation if you were to clear and farm that area. Okay, this is an example. This is similar to the data sheet you're looking at here. So we described the landscape. You need to know what physiographic province you're in. You need to know your parent material, your landscape position. These are all landscape features. We haven't gotten into the soil yet. So I think the next slide will help us get to physiographic province. Map of Maryland. We've got 3 main physiographic provinces and 1 named delineation between 2 of those. So starting in out west, we have the the Ridge and Valley and the Appalachian Mountains. We've got the Blue Ridge, the Ridge and Valley, and the Appalachian Plateau. We lump those all into the mountains. Then you move east, you get into the well-worn mountains, the Piedmont. The delineation between the Piedmont and the coastal plain is called the fall line. Let me go into the fall line a little bit. This is sort of a history, land use thing. It holds true all up and down the east coast of the U.S. So the streams coming down off of the mountains in the Piedmont and draining towards the bay, they're running over rocky beds. They have a lot of energy. They're coming down some pretty good slopes. They hit the coastal plain. The coastal plain is a pile of sediments. It's soft. It's not rocks. It's not hard. It's also more level. So years and years and years and years, millennia of this interaction causes erosion on the coastal plain, but your hard rocks are still there. You get waterfalls there. That's why it's called the fall line. West of the fall line, you can have more shallow soils, rockier rockier, shallower to bedrock. East of the fall line, or south and east of the fall line, the soils are going to be deeper and they're going to be composed of sediments. So where we have these waterfalls, we happened to put a lot of towns when we were colonizing and building up the land. That was a power source, hydropower. So if you look at a lot of towns like Laurel, Elk Ridge, a lot of the cities, Baltimore, Washington, they have the fall line going through them. We put our development there to use that power. Also, a lot of our reservoirs for the people living in these areas are put at the fall line now. We put the dams there. We were using them for hydropower. Now we're using them to impound our water for drinking. Water's going to keep coming up. Drinking water in the Piedmont areas is coming from reservoirs and rivers. Drinking water here is a different issue, and we'll get into that. So, if you want to find the fall line or know where you fall on the landscape, be geographically aware. We put our towns and cities along the fall line. Then we put our roads and our railroads right along the fall line. Well, where is it going to be easier to build a road or a railroad, such as Route 1 or the railroads going all up and down the East Coast parallel to Route 1? On the coastal plain, where it's easier to dig. You don't have to blast so much rock. So I-95, US Route 1, and the rail lines follow the fall line all up and down the east coast of the US. So there you can help yourself be geographically aware and make your first guess of where you fall and what your parent material of your soils might be. Are we east or west of the fall line, where we stand right now? East, yes, south and east of the fall line. So we're on the coastal plain. And just a little factoid here, your soils are thinner or shallower at the fall line, and they get thicker and thicker as this pile of sediment has accumulated. Here you might be just a few feet from bedrock. Down in Ocean City, they did a boring down there. The bedrock was over a mile, over 6,000 feet to bedrock. That's thick. That's a lot of sediment. So here our soils are almost always deep. Okay, any questions about that or its relevance? So this helps you figure out your material. So our parent material choices. One is missing here. It's called residuum, but we'll go into that one in a moment. Colluvium is sediment or material that has moved downhill by gravity, not by running water and so forth. Alluvium is material that is deposited by running water, rivers and streams. As they come out of their banks during flood stage, they deposit material on a floodplain. And then you may encounter the words old alluvium or terrace deposits. That is also water deposited. And then coastal plain sediments. That's your parent material for pretty much everything else on the coastal plain. It could be a colluvium or alluvium. Predominantly, we have coastal plain sediments. There are correlations between your landscape position, which we'll get into, and your parent materials. So let's move on to the next slide.
These PowerPoint slides are also going to be on Schoology by the end of the day.
Okay. So this is a little bit similar to what might happen on something like the Patuxent River. It's not exactly like what's going to happen on the bay shore, but we had to show it because it does show some of what might happen on a unstable steep slope. You'll notice that this has the words Lake, Phil, and Merced River, so you know it's not from around here. But similar things are happening. So this is a cross section. There's your river. Let's pretend that's the river there. And the alluvium, what's alluvium? Deposited by running water. So if the river came out of its banks, it would deposit the alluvium. Well, hey, the Patuxent River doesn't come up out of its banks down here. Thank goodness. But we do have these terraces. So in thousands, tens of thousands of years ago, the Patuxent River would have had a different shape and a different size, and it may have been able to come out of its banks. So if you are like going down Route 231, you know how you go down the hill at Halloween Point Park, and then it flattens out. That's actually a river terrace, and it no longer floods. Let's ignore lake fill. Let's call that terrace deposits then. An alluvial fan is where your water from your creeks that are adjoint or tributaries to the larger rivers are going to deposit materials as they lose energy. They come off of steeper slopes. They lose energy. They can't carry as much sediment. The more energy water has, the more sediment it can carry suspended in the water as it moves. But then if the water slows down for any reason, that sediment's going to drop out. So if a river or creek floods, it's got lots of energy just as it comes out of its banks, but then all of a sudden it's just like, it spreads out, it loses energy, and drops out that sediment on the floodplain. And that's alluvium. So an alluvial fan is as those creeks are coming off of the steeper slopes and losing energy and losing material. Colluvium, and here it would help to picture something like Calvert cliffs. The bay takes away the colluvium with the tides and the currents. But if we didn't have the bay taking that away, you might get deposits or buildups of material that's just fallen off of here. So you have colluvium at the base of the slopes or low down on slopes. Using the example of Halloween Point Park, you would actually find colluvium at the base of some of those hills. But when you're looking at coastal plain sediments, it's kind of hard to sort out what was deposited by water and what was just deposited by gravity and slumped. Because part of the reason part of the way we determine which mechanism has moved material is to look at the rocks within that soil. Are they well-rounded like river gravels, or are they just like blocky with the little corners chunked off? That's what happens in colluvium. They don't get well-worn, they just get chipped up and reorganized. So your rocks might have been deposited in layers like this. With colluvium, those layers tumble down and you get disoriented rocks. So those types of features of colluvium are really hard to see when you don't have rocks. Well, hey, we don't have many rocks around here. Okay, alluvium versus coastal plain sediments. This is kind of subtle. Because thinking about it, most of the layers that have been deposited on the coastal plain have been deposited by some form of water or another. Some layers and some cappings, the material we see now, is wind-blown silt, actually, or wind-blown soils on top of other soil materials. The Calvert Formation that we look at when we look at Calvert Cliffs is marine deposits. Otherwise, it wouldn't have shark's teeth in it, would it? So those deposits, many, many feet thick, laid down under shallow marine conditions. This diagram, I know it's a little bit hard to read, but it's sort of showing you that fall line we were talking about. Over here, we've got the rocks and stuff. So this hatched material is representing bedrock. And there's some vertical exaggeration here, obviously. And it's showing you the different groups of sediments. So this big Potomac group of sediments was laid down under a variety of conditions, including backwash from a comet that hit at the mouth of the bay. This one, this Potomac, they're calling it a confining zone. So this is kind of looking at aquifers as well. And we'll go into that a little bit more. This is the Aquia Formation. This is a marine deposit. And it's got some interesting minerals because it was a marine deposit. Here's another deposit, the Nanjemoy, a marine deposit, and the Marlborough clay, which we think is like a tidal marsh deposit. It's very clayey and got some weird features in it. Here's a deposit which we never see at the surface. It's kind of covered by all the sediments and it never comes to the surface. But remember I said that the sediments were thin up here at the fall line and get thicker and thicker as you go to the southeast. So we're kind of in the middle of that here in Calvert. We're not too far off the fall line, but so I would expect the depth to bedrock here more like 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile, a few thousand feet to bedrock. Any questions on this? This one over here, I don't know if you can even see what's going on here. We've got New Jersey here. That's got a lot of coastal plain. The fall line goes through Cecil County, right at the mouth of the Susquehanna River there, where the Conowingo Dam is. Coming down, we've got like Elk Ridge here over here in Baltimore. We've got Great Falls of the Potomac down here. So, sorry, that would be about here. That's all representing fall line. And so anything south and east, coastal plain. Okay, landscape position. Where are you on the landscape? Sort of determines how the soil was developed interacting with water. Water is one of the main movers and shakers in soil formation. So your landscape position choices in Envirothon are sort of pared down to these 4. We have discussed floodplain a little bit. For our purposes, if you're on a floodplain, you should be able to see, hear, or know that there's a body of water nearby, a creek or a river. It's usually fairly level, and that body of water that has put that alluvium down is nearby. So floodplains have what type of parent material? Alluvium. So there's a correlation often between your landscape position and your parent material. Your terrace, I mentioned that before, but that's a place where it's no longer flooding. The river doesn't, or creek does not come out to this level anymore. It's often nearly level. The parent material there might be considered old alluvium in a lot of cases. Most everything else is called upland. So if you're on a slope like this, or on the top, the summit, or even down at the toe of the slope, you would call it the upland. Then there are depressions within the upland. So upland depression, it says concave landforms or natural drainage ways found at higher elevations. So, you know the difference between convex and concave. This little diagram here to help you recall those. So a depression is going to be concave in usually three directions. One thing I like to do when I'm describing landscapes or thinking about the water cycle or anything is to kind of think, imagine I'm a raindrop or there's a raindrop falling. Where does that raindrop go? Or a raindrop falls near me, does it come towards me from at least two directions, if not three or four? A closed circular depression, we don't have many of those around here. But over on the Eastern Shore, there's lots of those. We would have more of the natural drainage ways or heads of drains where you're concave in two directions or three. Like, a bowl with a spout would be concave in three directions. Come at you from the side, the back, and then it would go out the spout. Any questions? I made that description because there was somebody who was okay, so a soil is the result of 5 soil-forming factors interacting. So we've looked at parent material, that's one of them. We've looked at landscape, so landscape position or topography is another of them. Let's see, let me continue to go into the other 5 soil-forming, or the rest of the 5 soil-forming factors. What else do we have? Anybody know? Climate, yes. How much rain? When do you get it? Or do you get it? Does precipitation come in the wintertime as snow, and that's all of your precipitation? Those kinds of questions, or those kinds of factors affect the soil formed in any given place. Oh my goodness, sorry about that. So we've got topography, parent material, climate, animals, yeah, organisms is one way to put it. The 5th one's a little bit time. Yes, it's a little bit abstract. But how long have those other 4 soil-forming factors been interacting to form the soil you see in any place? So, a soil, as we describe it, has layers. The layers are called horizons. The horizons get names. We work with the names and the arrangement of the horizons to help us classify that soil. In our classification system, we include things like, how old is that soil? What type of parent material is that soil coming from? How weathered is that soil? And the names and thicknesses of the horizons help us sort all this out. For our purposes, we just look at the master horizons. That's these capital letters. Back up one. You guys got deeper into soil classification than I ever imagined you would at Nationals. Generally speaking, as a soil scientist, this is the last thing I describe. Because I need to know a lot more about my soil before I can say which horizons I've got. Also, for your purposes, I don't put a lot of weight on this. It's a really tricky subject to cover, and soil scientists will stand and debate for hours on the names not only of the sub-horizons, the finer details, but the master horizons. So it is no surprise if this subject is a little bit confusing to y'all with just a brief introduction to soils. But let's proceed. You do not always find all of these master horizons in any given situation. We often do not see the O horizon. The O horizon is organic material. All organic, not mineral, organic. In a setting like this, out there in the field, right next to us, there is no O horizon. Years and years ago, when it was trees, there may have been an O horizon, but in a forest, your O horizon is very thin. You've got lots of leaves piled on top. That's not my soil yet. My soil, my O horizon would be the highly decomposed leaves where I can't even determine that it was leaves. And it's also mixed in by organisms. The organic material is highly mixed in with the mineral material. So when that happens, we quickly become the A horizon. A horizons are characterized by being darkened or pigmented by organic material. So let's think of rot. Organisms die and decompose, be they plants or animals. Other organisms eat them up and decompose them. As organic materials decompose, you get this dark brown material. You might call it humus. Highly decomposed organic matter. That highly decomposed organic matter is actually very small particles, and those particles are acting as paint on the larger soil mineral particles. So in an A horizon, the paint on the mineral particles is organic material. So you look at the color of the soil material, and if it's a darkish brown or darker brown than the other layers, then you would consider it to be an A horizon. A horizons are not always at the surface. In a colluvial setting or an alluvial setting where you have frequent deposition on top, the deposition may have buried an A horizon deeper in the soil profile. So it's not the position of that horizon, it's what's pigmenting it. Is it organic material or is it something else? So if it's darkened by organic material, it's an A horizon, regardless of where it is. Commonly, our A horizons are at the surface. Then every once in a while, you have a highly abused soil, not darkened by organic material, even at the surface, we have no A horizon even. The E horizon, we have a new term here, eluviated. That means washed out of. So the E horizon has materials washed out of it. In the highly biologically active A horizon, you have all sorts of chemical and physical things going on. Those things interacting with water, you might have organic acids produced, you might have freezing and thawing, wetting and drying. These things change the minerals in the A horizon, maybe make them soluble, and they move through an E horizon, out of the E horizon, and into the B horizon. So a B horizon is a zone where things accumulate. E horizon is where things exit. That's what the word I like to use. They exit and they go into the B horizon, or horizons below. We rarely see E horizons here in this part of Maryland. We've had 400 years of agricultural cultivation. So cultivation mixes your A and your E horizon up, and you can no longer see your E horizon. In the woods, a lot of times in our area, the woods are very steep. You don't have a long time to develop an E-horizon that's highly visible. There are some ecosystems or habitats that do develop E-horizons. That tends to be like pine woods and sandy soils. Okay, the B horizon, or subsoil, I mentioned that it's a place where things accumulate. A B horizon is the zone of maximum development. Pretty much meaningless, isn't that? What is soil profile development? Well, it's clay and other materials moving through that soil over thousands of years, moving and changing. We call them transformations and translocations. And you look for signs of those transformations and translocations in your B horizon. What might those be? They're subtle. Usually, in a well-drained setting, you will have accumulations of clay in the B horizon, and those accumulations of clay can be visible by some subtle little features if you're looking at it in a pit, or by texture. So in just a few minutes, we'll go into texture. We'll actually get our hands dirty on our soil profiles, and we'll try and pick out the B horizon and see if it really is showing us any of this. But a B horizon tends to be higher in clay than the overlying horizons, if that B horizon was formed in place under those particular A and E horizons. Lots of different combinations and permutations of soil, those 5 soil-forming factors. We're looking for signs of all of that to show us a B horizon. Not all soils have a B horizon. So this is why this concept is not simple to explain or retain or understand. For instance, seed horizon, parent material. We don't often see a good C horizon in most of our upland soils here. It's A, then all kinds of B horizons below it. You might not see a C horizon unless you're on a floodplain where that's a young soil, where the soil formation has not had time to develop a B horizon. And then bedrock. How far did I say it might be to bedrock here? We're not going to drill down that far. We can't dig down that far and show you guys bedrock here. So for our purposes, we're stopping at the C horizon here.
A ruler.
Oh, look, a ruler. Measuring soil horizons. Where do we start? The top. The interface between the soil and the air above it. That's 0. Do we start in, if we're in the woods, do we start in the leaves? No, that's not yet soil. We start at the O, if it's there, or the A, if it's there, or the B, if that's what's at the top. So we start at 0. In the contest, we give you a known depth. So I'll put nail in the profile at some point, and I'll tell you that's 20 inches from the surface. So what you can do, take your tape measure, so I say it's 20 inches from the surface, you take 20, you put it on that nail, you know where I said 0 was. Or we are the ultimate arbiters of where 0 is for the contest. We say where 0 is, and we tell you where we thought 0 was by giving you a known depth. Does that make sense? For our purposes, we usually work in inches. You will, if you get into college and you're working with people who are doing real science, they work in SI units. So inches, centimeters, whatever. I can translate those in my head. Effective rooting depth. Now we're getting into interpretations, looking at how that soil is going to behave for us. Rooting depth is, if you're in the woods and looking at a soil pit, don't simply follow the roots and say, well, I don't see any roots down here, so I think the rooting depth is right here. You need to look more at the soil physical properties. So you'll have tools available to you, maybe a tape measure or a screwdriver or something, so you can feel resistance. So you'll poke at that soil and see how hard. If you think it's hard for you to poke through that soil, it's real hard for a root to penetrate that soil. We do have a soil feature. It's not rock, it's not bedrock or anything. It's called a fragipan. And it's a very dense layer of soil that is root limiting. You can feel a fragipan. You'll poke at that soil profile, and it's hard. It resists. And if you've ever watched anybody dig with a backhoe in a fragipan, the backhoe will stand up. So backhoes are strong things. And they'll go and they'll dig, and the backhoe will, it's soil. I can break it up. I can give it a texture. It's not cemented together. It's not a rock, but it is hard. It's as hard or dense as concrete. And roots don't generally like to grow through concrete. But they do like to grow through cracks in concrete, right? They'll destroy foundations and pipes and sidewalks and stuff. So it just so happens the fragipan comes in dense columns, and we'll get a little bit into soil structure. But you've got these large features in the soil that are about maybe this big to this big, and within that column, it's dense. Between it, there are these cracks that are where soil material has fallen in over thousands of years, and those are fluffier, less dense, and that's where the roots will grow. Root limiting layers, such as hard pans or plow pans or fragipans, are, you're going to see features with roots and trees in particular that help to show you this. So if you see a lot of places where trees have been blown over in the wind, tree throw, and you look at the roots on that ball, that root ball that came down, sometimes you'll see that the roots are flat. They have like grown laterally, not gone through that restricting layer, but grown laterally. And when that tree falls over, you see that the roots like go down and take a hard turn. Other dense layers, we tend to cause them. A feature called a plow pan or a hard pan. So just below the area where we manipulate or maybe mow over, you get denser and denser soils as you like put traffic over that, a lawnmower, or foot traffic, or hoof traffic if you have livestock, or tractor traffic if you're tilling or cultivating that land. So those root restricting layers are important when it comes to managing plants, plant growth, or other soil uses. So you may have a shallow dense layer that we might call a hard pan or a plow pan. A deeper dense layer, that fragipan I was speaking of, tends to be on upland soils, and it's about 2 to 4 feet below the surface. You can also have chemical restrictions to root growth. If you have maybe a salty or an extremely acidic layer, that plants can't put their roots into. Or in, maybe out in the Serpentine Barrens in parts of the Piedmont and the mountains, there's rocks that have a lot of magnesium, like toxic levels of magnesium, and if that layer is encountered by roots, they just can't grow into it. It might be toxic to the plants. So you have other chemical barriers or chemical restrictions to rooting. But here in this part of the coastal plain, I'm not going to say you never see this, but for Envirothon purposes, you will rarely see it, the chemical restrictions to rooting depth. If I were to show that to you and expect you to see it, I would expect it to be vivid, very, very easy to see. How deep? Again here, very deep. Soil scientists tend to like categories. So we'll have very deep, that's greater than 6 feet to a restrictive layer, or 4 to 6 feet to a restrictive layer. A drainage class, well drained, is greater than 4 feet to water table. So a shallow soil might be 10 to 20 inches to bedrock for a restrictive layer. Okay. Any questions there? We'll go into that in a little more. Okay, soil texture. Let's stop our PowerPoint here. I'm sure you're tired of me babbling on. And I'm going to get our soil profiles, and we're going to look into texture.